Well, good morning, everyone. Can I welcome you to the 18th meeting in 2012 of the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Can I remind everybody to turn off their mobile phones and Blackberries because they do affect the broadcasting system. Item 1 is the Water Resources Scotland Bill, and the committee will hear further evidence on Water Resources Scotland Bill at stage 1 from Scottish Water today. But before I begin, I think I would like to record the whole committee's condolences on the sudden death of the Scottish Water Chief Executive, Richard Ackroyd. Naturally, our thoughts are with his family, friends and colleagues at this very sad time. It is, however, also fitting, I think, to highlight the committee's recognition of the hugely significant role Mr Ackroyd played in the growth and development of Scottish Water in recent years. Can I welcome the witnesses from Scottish Water, Chris Wallace, Director of Communications, and Belinda Oldfield, Regulation General Manager of Scottish Water. Adam, you're going to start off the questioning this morning.
Yes. Good morning. The committee has heard many calls for the definition of the value of Scotland's water resource, not just to be defined as an economic value, but to include environmental and social aspects to value. What's Scottish Water's view on this discussion that we've been having?
I think Scottish Water welcomes the proposals that are laid out before the Scottish Parliament in the bill. And the proposals provide a strong statutory basis for developing Scotland's water resources in the interests of Scotland. And our consideration, our belief is that that is both economic, societal and environmental benefits. So we see that covering all the pillars of sustainability.
It would be helpful to spell that out on the face of the bill as opposed to what has been taken as a narrow definition of value as economic.
I think that might provide useful clarification. We've certainly always interpreted it in the wider sense.
Now, the second issue that I'd like to raise with you, several witnesses have called for ministerial directions to designated bodies to be subject to consultation, both with other designated bodies and possibly the wider public prior to them coming into force. What's Scottish Water's view on this suggestion, and would it bring any benefits?
I think we don't have strong views on this. As one of the designated bodies, I mean, we're fairly clear that we're designated in the bill. I think it may be appropriate to consult more widely with other bodies should they become designated, and to have wider discussion, but we don't have strong views on it.
Ask Mr Wallace, as Director of Communications, whether he thinks it would be useful to consult with the wider public on these issues.
Our philosophy is to be as open and transparent as we possibly can. We're answerable to this Parliament. Any channel that broadens that possibility of engaging with our public and our stakeholders has to be welcomed.
Well, we'll take that as a yes then. Okay. The final question I've got to ask. The committee has heard suggestions that the requirement for Scottish ministers to report to the Scottish Parliament on the exercise of their functions under the bill after 3 years should be aligned with reports issued under other water-related legislation. What's your view on this suggestion? Indeed, we've heard witnesses who suggest that it's only there is no rolling 3-year report established within the legislation, but one report after 3 years. What's your interpretation of that, and what's your view, Scottish Water's view, on the reporting structure as laid out in the legislation?
I think it's fair to say that the bill is a little bit ambiguous in that respect. We've interpreted as that there would be a reporting duty every 3 years. that seems reasonable. A longer period wouldn't be effective. A shorter period might be too short to have anything of substance to report out. So it might be useful for the bill to clarify what's required, if it's once every 3 years or just once.
Can I ask, what types of things do you think should be included in these reports?
It would be helpful. Certainly, we haven't thought this through, but it would be helpful to understand from, I guess, the public perspective, what the government's undertaken, what activities have taken place over the period, what benefits are coming through to society, through to the economy, through to the environment. So very much an overarching report in terms of what's being done and how much progress has been made.
Anybody else got any questions on part one? No. Move to part two, control of water abstraction. Alex.
Thank you very much, Convener. We've heard from a number of witnesses that part two of the bill was something of a surprise, and there was only very limited or no consultation prior to the introduction of the bill for this section. Were Scottish Water consulted on the proposed new abstraction rules?
I believe that we were aware that there'd be some abstraction rules coming through. Being a major abstractor, I think we were consulted, yes.
Anyway, given that you're here now, are you able to tell us what your view of the proposals are?
I think it's quite reasonable for abstractions at that level, which are perhaps exceptional. There's not a lot of abstractions at that level in the country. For those to come to the attention of ministers, that would be our view. We're quite comfortable with it.
Do you have any views on the logic behind the 10 megalitre limit?
No, I can't comment on that, I'm afraid.
What about the exemptions that are contained within the bill?
Well, I think the exemptions are proper. Now, there is a question as to whether those exemptions are sufficiently comprehensive. There may well have been one or two sectors missed out, and that would be worth clarification. But certainly the exemptions at the moment, we are one of those organisations that are exempted because obviously we abstract for the purposes of providing drinking water to protect public health.
Under the bill, abstractions are exempt where they are carried out for the sole purposes of exercising Scottish Water's core functions. Are you able to say whether you would anticipate qualifying abstractions to be undertaken in relation to Scottish Water's non-core functions?
It's quite clear to us that if we were wishing to abstract on our non-core side of the business, we would have to come through to Scottish ministers. Or in fact, we would have to come through the controlled activities regulations with SEPA. So the exemption does not cover non-core activities. You'd
basically be treated the same as anyone else if you wanted to abstract on that basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. We've heard, I think Scottish Water have said in their written evidence that you're supportive of the proposals in part 3, but some witnesses have raised concerns that Scottish Water Horizons may be operating at an advantage in comparison to their commercial rivals in the field of waste management and renewable energy. Did you have any role at all in the development of the proposals in part 3 of the bill?
This is in the separation of core and non-core activities. We were consulted on that, on those aspects of the bill. Our view on that is that it's a helpful clarification that our core business is there to provide water and wastewater services for customers in Scotland. It's quite helpful to understand that the charges that those customers pay is only for that water and wastewater services, or those water and wastewater services. It helpfully clarifies that non-core activities will not be financed by customers. Those non-core activities have to be financed in other means. And I'm sure the Water Industry Commission will be happy to elaborate on that.
Okay, so through Scottish Water Horizons, you're already, I understand, investing in renewable energy generation, and you've got waste management activities. Can you tell us how specifically this part of the bill will benefit Scottish Water in carrying out its existing activities?
I think where we find it helpful is that it places a proactive duty on us to fully utilise assets in the non-core side of the business where we can for the benefit of Scotland. So it's a very slight, a very subtle movement, but it helps, it gives us a proactive duty rather than just something that naturally falls out of our core business.
And is this the only route for achieving this, or could other options be considered, such as Scottish ministers providing formal directions to Scottish Water in its role as a designated body?
We're into commercial activities. What the bill does in this respect, it's a statement of ambition, a statement of expectation of how ministers would want us to develop and grow our business. So you're quite right in saying we're already involved in these areas, but this is a formal green light, if you like, and making it much more publicly known, much more transparent, that this is a direction we'd be expected to move into. And you can even relate that back to your previous question. If people have concerns now about unfair advantages in a competitive market, this transparency and this fact that this is now coming into the open, that we are expected to develop in this area, will lead to more scrutiny, which can only be a good thing. We absolutely feel there's nothing to hide here. We keep these two bits of the business absolutely separate, and I'm sure Wix, as Belinda said, will have reassurances to give around that and the way we're regulated. We probably wouldn't welcome direct ministerial guidance on commercial matters because it's a more fluid, dynamic, competitive market. You're either a business or you're not, and part of our philosophy would be that we have to be given a free hand in that. It would be of interest maybe to discuss the attitude to risk in the public sector, because that plays in here. If we are acting as a business and trying to make headway, as this bill gives us clear indication that this is an expectation of where we're expected to go, it's maybe worth debating, not just here but more widely, public's expectation on us, how we're to perform, how we manage that risk, what's acceptable, what isn't. Right now we've made very small steps in these markets, and we've been very, very careful. Scottish Water Horizons has very small share capital to invest in various things. We have to be careful. But now we've been given a signal that more of the same, please. Can you accelerate that? So we have to juggle that risk and think, if we're going to make bigger steps, how can we mitigate risk? And equally, what do we need to offload? What do we need to make our owners aware of? The dangers in doing so, as well as the opportunities.
Okay. When we had the Centre for Water Law they indicated in their evidence that the wording of the section defining core functions means that certain hydronation-related activities, for example, Horizon generating electricity for use by Scottish Water, could potentially fall within the definition of a core function. Would you share these views or these concerns?
No. No is the answer. We're a regulated business. We're absolutely transparent. Horizons makes commercial decisions. I don't see any conflict there. It's all audited and open to scrutiny.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if I might return to the issue that was raised by the Convener, and which you partly addressed in your earlier answer, around the suggestion that Scottish Water Horizons are enjoying an unfair competitive advantage because of the access which they have to loans at favourable rates, and also access to substantial existing facilities and land banks which you have as part of Scottish Water. Now, I know you've said that you keep different parts of your business separate, and you're very happy for this issue to be subject to maximum scrutiny and transparency, but I think it's only fair that you have the opportunity on the record at this committee to give the fullest possible response to the suggestion that has been made with regard to you having an unfair advantage. So I'd welcome your views on that, and then I've got a further question once you've addressed that.
I think we'd need specific instances, more specific. These are
by other witnesses to this committee, as the convener has already mentioned, the Scottish Environmental Services Association and SSE, that in terms of your activities in the fields of waste management and renewable energy, that you enjoy an unfair competitive advantage. Can you please address that point?
There may, I can understand how that would be those organisations' perception. But the reality is that the non-core business is financed at commercial rates. We're not financed at any subsidised rate by Scottish Government. We have to be very careful, and the Government has to be very careful of EU state aid rules. So just for the record, there is no... Scottish Water Horizons does not enjoy any beneficial rate from Scottish Government in terms of financing. So it's all done on a proper commercial basis.
So you're very clear that there is no breach or potential breach of EU state aid rules in this regard?
And I would also add that routinely we are subject to scrutiny by the Water Industry Commissioner through reviews that he undertakes or the Commission undertakes as part of their auditing on transfer pricing. So there is also protection for customers and for the Government in terms of ensuring that we're very, we don't have any cross subsidies either within core and non-core or financing from outside Scottish Water.
Anything a legal challenge any day soon then? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we move on to part 4, raw water quality. Margaret?
Yeah, good morning. First, I've got 3 questions. So my first question is, how will the provisions in the bill allowing Scottish Water to enter into agreements with land managers assist in improving raw water quality? And is there anything preventing Scottish Water from entering into such agreements at present?
Well, the bill proposes powers for Scottish Water to be able to enter land if needed to protect raw water. We don't have those provisions at the moment. In terms of what does that mean, what does it look like? We have a duty to provide drinking water to customers that is fit for consumption. A lot of the difficulty that we find in treating water is because something has happened in the catchment. And that's usually due to farmers, animals breaching fences and entering the watercourse and putting faecal matter into the watercourse. It can happen because farmers are using particular pesticides to spray their crops. So we are currently actively working with land managers, farmers and landowners to look at changes in behaviour so that they can, they actually have buffer zones that are properly fenced off, and we would talk excuse me, with land managers and farmers to make sure that they were aware of the difficulties that their activity was placing on the water environment. So there's strands to this in terms of education and awareness of the farming community. There's also discussions with farmers ongoing around switching use of pesticides, so encouraging farmers to actually use different pesticides which have a lesser impact on the raw water. And the benefit that customers generally get from this is that if we can manage that raw water problem at source and reduce, or if you like, increase the quality of raw water coming into treatment works, it reduces the cost of treatment, and that then reduces customer charges to customers. So we're working actively at the moment in the River Ugie catchment and in the River Devon catchment, with a lot of land agents, farmers and land managers. We would see the proposed powers being used very judiciously. We think it just gives us legitimacy, and it gives our catchment liaison officers legitimacy as they walk the catchments and as they build relationships with farmers.
With regard to that so answer, SEPA are already doing that just now at the moment, aren't they? That's part of their role.
SEPA's role is one of a monitoring and enforcement agency, and they're certainly undertaking some catchment walking in what they consider priority catchments for the environment. The proposed powers for us are very complementary, and our focus is different. Our focus would be on protecting raw water for consumption, for public health reasons.
Okay, thanks. My next question is, evidence has highlighted the importance of a catchment-wide approach to managing Scottish water resources and suggested that Scottish Water must work in partnership with land managers, local river basin management teams and other bodies such as the RSPB to ensure that the quality of raw water is managed properly. To what extent do you work in partnership at a local level? And also, could the bill do more to emphasise this type of catchment-wide approach?
We're currently working in partnership with SEPA, with National Farmers Union Scotland, with the voluntary initiative in the River Ugi. We are about to start conversations with RSPB, so certainly our approach is one which is highly collaborative with the stakeholders in the environment. We've also been working with SEPA on shared training initiatives where staff from Scottish Water are being trained by SEPA, so that we can dovetail our activities, and we're working collaboratively. I think the bill proposals are quite extensive in this regard. I think they're sufficient. I don't think that they could be reinforced any further. That's my personal view.
And lastly, the Centre for Water Law is concerned that Scottish Water may end up entering into agreements that support land managers simply to meet their legal requirements. Can you give assurances that this situation will not occur?
Absolutely. We are very clear that farmers' activities must comply with the general binding rules. So first and foremost, they must comply with the general rules in Scotland that have been set out, and SEPA enforce against those. Any activities or any agreements that we enter into beyond that with farmers, very much, that's the baseline. Activities that we would be entering into agreement with farmers would be for the provision of biobeds, which are biological beds, and which would take away pesticide runoff when they're starting to fill up sprayers. It would be working with them to encourage them to make sure that their pesticide, when they fill up the pesticide sprayers and things, that's all done quite far away from the watercourse. So this provision of advice, financing them to help them actually put in place biobeds, or helping with extending buffer strips, or switching out pesticide use. So where it is absolutely beneficial for farmers to cease using chemicals like metaldehyde and to switch to some other pesticide, those are activities that are beyond the general binding rules, and we're very, very clear about that. We've been in discussion with the Scottish Government State Aid Department. Our schemes have been through the European Commission to ensure that we don't infringe the state aid rules.
Thank you.
Okay, move to, don't think there are any questions on part 5. Part 6, Gordon?
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the sewer networks, and I understand that Scottish Water supports most of the proposals in part 6. In written evidence, Scottish Water indicated that these will support the development of a catchment management approach to the urban drainage network. Can you explain what an urban catchment management approach involves and how the proposals in the bill will assist in this development?
I think it's again, it's back to the earlier conversation, which is around powers of entry. And so where we currently have catchment liaison officers who are out in the environment walking rivers of particular interest to us, where we're aware of pollutants coming into the sewer system, which is essentially an open system, we would have liaison officer or catchment inspectors with powers as proposed in the bill, able to enter premises if we find that we're getting significant inputs of something into the sewer system that shouldn't actually be there. We would then work in collaboration with SEPA in terms of SEPA's enforcement powers to make sure that that activity was ceased.
Would
so it's very similar.
Right, and would the private owners be expected to bear the cost of any improvement work in?
In all likelihood, yes. They are, in all likelihood, it's very difficult to talk without specifics, but the probability would be that they would be infringing some particular aspect of their own licence. The proposals in the bill would give us the power to actually be able to undertake active monitoring to check that.
We've also heard evidence that Scottish Water should investigate innovative ways of connecting properties served by septic tanks to the sewer network. Does Scottish Water have any long-term plans to connect properties currently served by septic tanks into the public network?
As a general comment, no. Septic tanks are a very sustainable and efficient way of treating wastewater in a rural environment. It is not cost effective for the generality of customers for us to start on a programme of trying to connect every septic tank into the sewerage network. Now, there may be instances where there's environmental issues, where it becomes important that actually some other solution is found. I think connecting to the public network is absolutely a last resort. We would work with householders where that was appropriate to help them empty septic tanks routinely, maintain septic tanks, and give them advice. Or in a public, more in a community setting, if it was causing huge environmental impact, we would look at some other solution with SEPA as to how we would work with the community.
You were saying that septic tanks work well, but we are hearing from evidence that around about 60%, two-thirds of all septic tanks are registered at the moment. And the bill does have proposals that a proprietor can take responsibility for maintaining and emptying shared septic tanks without the consent of other owners. Is there a role for Scottish Water where there is a third of tanks we don't know the ownership of, or there may be an owner who's not willing to take the responsibility? Is there a role for Scottish Water to take over ownership or maintenance of these septic tanks in interests of public health?
If I address your first question, we've certainly had discussions with SEPA about shared communication campaigns around septic tanks and the ongoing need for emptying and maintenance, etc. And we would be happy to do that. In terms of addressing specific issues in the interest of public health, we would have to look at that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Malcolm, you've got some questions on water shortage orders.
Yeah, Scottish Water indicates in your written evidence that water shortage orders are only likely to be used infrequently, with voluntary arrangements between Scottish Water, SEPA and land managers being the usual method of dealing with shortages. Could you explain how these voluntary arrangements currently operate and whether there have been any recent water shortage incidents where the powers in the bill would have proved useful?
I think we've had. I think it's fair to say that large-scale water shortages haven't happened in Scotland for some time, unlike the South East. But we do have short-term, smaller-scale water shortages. We've had shortages in Dumfries and Galloway back in, I think, 2010, where just periods of oddly dry weather in Scotland, in Dumfries and Galloway, where we have storage facilities that are not large, led to the fact that we had shortages in Dumfries and Galloway. We worked collaboratively with all of the stakeholders to make sure that customers were maintained in supply during that period. The proposals in the bill actually modernise all of the legislation around water shortages. What happened in Dumfries and Galloway highlighted the timescales that the earlier legislation would actually mean, and it meant that there was a lack of responsiveness with that legislation. So this legislation and the proposals within it would enable us to tackle water shortages and the activities that are needed to guarantee supplies to customers much more readily in agreement with local landowners, etc.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And finally, in the instance of water shortage orders being issued, would Scottish Water intend to treat certain non-domestic consumers differently depending on what they require water resources for?
I think that would be very specific to the area that the water shortage was in and the types of non-domestic users that were in that area.
Anyone else have any questions for Scottish Water? Okay, thank you very much for your evidence today. And I briefly suspend the session to allow a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. So we'll continue with our evidence session on the Water Resources Scotland Bill by hearing evidence now from the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, commonly known as the WICS. Can I welcome the witnesses Alan Sutherland, Chief Executive, and John Simpson, Director of Analysis of WICS Scotland. Can I thank you very much for your written evidence, and can I ask Adam to start off the questioning?
Okay. Morning, gentlemen. Could I ask firstly, what impact, if any, will the implementation of the proposals in the bill have on the price review for the period after 2015?
Marginal, I think. I think, to be clear, what we regulate economically are the core functions of Scottish Water. We do not have any involvement in any of the non-core activities of Scottish Water, with the exception of Scottish Water's retail activity, where we have a general responsibility around the licensing framework that allows Business Stream alongside other retailers to compete for non-household customers.
In terms of the impact of the proposals in the bill, do you think they will have any on Scottish Water's customers in terms of either price or customer service?
Well, in terms of the price that Scottish Water's core customers pay, households and the retailers that pay wholesale charges to Scottish Water, they will be at the lowest level that is consistent with the delivery of the objectives set out by the Scottish Government. So, you know, what our job essentially is to take the Government's objectives for the industry, the Government's principles of charging, and to calculate the lowest reasonable overall cost of delivering those. So, you know, we will keep that number as low as we can reasonably keep it, consistent with a sustainable industry that we all want to see.
There's nothing intrinsic in this bill that would create upward pressure on prices, for example.
I think there are some things that you were discussing around catchment management and the like that push the other way, help us keep bills down. Things like better regulation of fats and greases in the sewer system clearly helps keep costs down. So that ought to help, but in the great scheme of things, they are relatively marginal to the overall impact on the end customer.
In terms of customer relations, as it were, in terms of customer service, you've heard some arguments about the need for wider public consultation on certain issues and the like. Are you satisfied that Scottish Water's claims to be very open and transparent and seeking public consulting with the public is at a good standard, or can that be improved?
Oh, it's always possible to improve communication and interaction with customers and stakeholders generally, but I think it's certainly fair to say that certainly within the core activities that we observe, Scottish Water is very active in communicating about things, whether at a local level or more generally about where it's going as a business.
Okay, Alex?
I was going to ask, in your opinion, is the way the bill separates Scottish Water's core and non-core functions robust enough to make sure that we don't end up with customers paying extra to finance non-core activities?
That's our job to make sure that they don't.
But is the bill strong enough in terms of its definition?
I think the bill is strong enough. Absolutely. I think one of the things that we engage in on a fairly regular basis, and given other witnesses' comments, we'll start again, is to look very hard at how Scottish Water allocates its costs. We do this every sort of 2 or 3 years. In order to ensure that there is no question of households or business customers picking up the costs of commercial activities. Now, whilst they don't pick up any of the costs, of course, any benefits that accrue, it would be for the Scottish Government to decide where those benefits get allocated, and they may choose to leave some of them in the business for households. They may, of course, choose to use them for alternative purposes. But what can't happen, of course, is that customers get any of the benefits but bear none of the costs. That doesn't work in a sort of rational commercial world. And if we want Scottish Water to compete in these non-core activities, then we have to allow them to behave like business people.
If I can add to that, we collect detailed accounting information each year, which contains Scottish Water's allocations of costs between the core business and the non-core business. So we know what's going on. In addition to that, we get again each year the list of transactions that have taken place between the core and non-core parts of Scottish Water. So we know what's going on there. And from time to time, we carry out a detailed review looking behind that information at the detailed paper trail, if you like, within Scottish Water. So we are very aware of the importance of ring-fencing the core business from the non-core business. And it's a matter of us being on the ball year on year in making sure that things are as they should be. So we think we have the necessary powers and procedures to do that.
The bill places a duty on Scottish Water to pursue a number of these non-core functions. Are you satisfied that this change won't impact on Scottish Water's pursuit of its core functions. And are we in effect making the, as we do this, are we diluting, dangerous word I was trying to avoid, are we diluting Scottish Water's pursuit of its core functions?
Certainly, we will not have any regard to that in terms of the efficiency challenge that we set before Scottish Water. So, Scottish Water will have the same regulatory settlement that it would have had, irrespective of what it happens to do in the non-core areas of activity. So it's for them to find a way of justifying that. Now, if they need extra resources in the non-core area in order to pursue these, that's going to be a commercial decision for them, and it's not something that, frankly, we'll take much interest in. But what we are going to be focused on is ensuring that that core business performs in absolutely the very best way that it can to the benefit of customers in Scotland. We have the lowest average household charges in Scotland. There's no particular reason why we need to see increases, certainly beyond the rate of inflation, going forward.
If Scottish Water fail to get on with the core business and making sure that their pipes don't leak and things like that, you'll be the first to point it out.
Well, indeed. You can rest assured of that.
Thank you.
Malcolm.
Given that Scottish Water is already investing in renewable energy generation and waste management activities, do you have a view on whether this part of the bill, part 3 of the bill, is actually necessary, and will it benefit Scottish Water in carrying out such activities?
Well, I suppose it's worth making a clear distinction here. There are certain obligations placed on Scottish Water by Scottish ministers within the core business to use certain proportions of green energy and the like. So those are strategic decisions that have been made by government, and as such we ensure that that's funded at the lowest reasonable overall cost, along with everything else. When you go beyond that, then it becomes a non-core activity. So there are some renewable activities which are core because they're part of these defined objectives set out by the Scottish Government. There are the other renewable activities which are not part of what's been defined by the Scottish Government, that are at the discretion of Scottish Water. And I guess that's what the bill is trying to do. It's trying to make much greater clarity over those activities and drawing a very clear distinction between those and what is required by ministerial objective.
But in practice, is there not a clear distinction at present?
It can always, on the margin, be questionable as to what exactly, how much is coming from one source versus another source. It's not, things like wind energy are very variable in terms of the amounts that can be put into the grid. So you will get slightly different answers depending on the time period you're looking at. So I think it's just worth having the clarity there.
Will it help you in your work that you do to have that clarity? Or?
I suspect it's one of these additional things. As John said, we get lists of transactions. It's another thing that we can add to that list of ensuring that we get greater clarity.
Yeah, on the margins, it can only help. And as and when the activity increases in size, then it becomes more material, more important that we do have clarity at the boundaries.
Okay, you finished, Malcolm? Yeah. If we look a bit closer at Scottish Water subsidiaries, we've heard concerns from others that Scottish Water Horizons may be operating at an advantage to commercial rivals in the field, as we've discussed already, of waste management and renewable energy, due to access to loans at favourable rates and access to substantial existing facilities and land banks, for example. How would you respond to such concerns?
Every business has a modestly different cost of capital. depending on its ownership structure, its levels of debt, its the quality of its management. So you're just comparing simply the cost of capital of one business with another business doesn't necessarily say that that business has got an advantage, or if it does say it's got an advantage, and it doesn't necessarily say as to why it's got an advantage. As to what the arrangements are for Horizon's expected returns or costs of debt that it is charged, that's purely a matter for the Scottish Government, and you've already heard this morning about state aid rules that are that have to be abided by in this area. What we do within the retail space for Business Stream is we very clearly set a return that Business Stream has to be capable of earning in order to ensure that it is at absolutely no advantage versus the other potential retailers in Scotland. So yes, it's publicly owned. Yes, it's accountable through Scottish Water to the Parliament as any public body, element of a public entity is. But it has absolutely no financial advantage. Now, I would assume, given that legally on paper the structures of Horizons look very similar to the ones that we originally created for Business Stream, that similar arrangements exist. But really the right people to ask about that are Scottish Water and Scottish Government, because I would assume that they will be very careful, as we've been, and I know they were keen that we were careful on this to ensure that whatever cost allocations are made are reasonable and fair and do not compromise people's abilities to compete. But you can't. You're not going to have any two businesses that are absolutely identical. If someone's got a bit more land than someone else, or their land happens to be at the top of a hill, then clearly it might be better land for wind farms or not, depending on the circumstances.
In relation to the EU state aid rules, I mean, we have heard, we have got evidence from others who think that perhaps the Scottish Government's support of Scottish Water Horizons may breach those rules. Do you have a view on such claims?
We've taken a council opinion on state aid for other purposes, and based on that opinion, I would think it unlikely that they are breaching, because in essence, under state aid, you have there has to be a material advantage that impacts on interstate level trade, and in a material way. So it's unclear that any of these specific projects that Scottish Water would be involved in are big enough or substantial enough to be caught by this. That doesn't mean you can't be. You don't want to be careful on it. You certainly don't want to be cavalier, and you certainly want to make sure that your financing is not overtly generous.
The bill also allows Scottish ministers to make loans and grants directly to subsidiaries of Scottish Water as part of the total annual Scottish Government finance provided to Scottish Water. What's your view on this proposal, and could this additional funding have the effect maybe of depleting available resources for Scottish Water's core water and sewage functions?
Well, it certainly would not be desirable if it in any way were to impact the levels of borrowing that were being made available to Scottish Water in its core functions. The borrowing that's there is something that we look at very carefully in terms of the ongoing financial sustainability of Scottish Water. We want to ensure that there's no reason that we're delaying expenditures for the future or something that will ultimately put bills up just to keep them a bit lower than they otherwise would be today. So what we want is to create a financial regime for Scottish Water where we can look confidently ahead, as I think we can right now, and say there isn't any particular reason why we see bills needing to go up for the foreseeable future. And that includes beyond 2015 when the next regulatory period kicks in. Now, if someone were to decide that, you know, no borrowing at all, we're going to be available from Scottish Water because we're going to have it all go into non-core activities of Scottish Water, then clearly you would be seeing an impact on household bills, and we would no doubt be wanting to say something about that. But I suspect there'll be quite a lot of MSPs who might want to say something about that as well.
Sure. Margaret.
Good morning. The committee has also held calls for Scottish Water to promote water efficiency amongst its customers with a view to reducing costs. What is your views on this?
Well, Scottish Water is already required to you give advice to customers on water efficiency. Your business stream on the non-household side has made a new business activity. I wish it wasn't. Business streams is irritating because you want to call it a business stream, but a whole new business activity in terms of providing advice to non-household customers that is saving those customers money. The truth of the matter is, however, that saving water does not actually reduce costs very much, at least in the short run. So until you get to the next asset replacement cycle, when you can reduce the size of your assets, you just reducing the cost, reducing the amount of water you consume really literally saves you the costs of the energy of pumping it and the chemicals that go into it, which are, what, John, 2-3% of cost, something of that order?
About 3 or 4 now.
3 or 4. So it's not, it's just not that big a deal. So yes, desirable. Anything that allows us to reduce subtraction and leave the environment in a better state is a good thing, but not from the standpoint of reducing costs to customers.
Okay, Gordon.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question regarding deemed contracts. Consumer Focus Scotland said in their evidence that they had concerns about the operation of the deemed contract system in the energy supply industry. They said in their evidence that our experience in the energy sector tells us that the lack of clarity and agreement between suppliers and customers on whether and what services are being provided can cause significant, sometimes intractable problems. Can you explain what Wix is doing to learn the lessons of how this system is operating in other industries to prevent such issues arising in the water industry?
Well, I think it's not entirely clear what Consumer Focus Scotland are saying on this. What deemed contracts are about is introducing clarity as to what the responsibility of each particular customer behind a particular meter is. Now, the likelihood is that we will keep this as simple as we possibly can. So if there are 6 customers behind a meter, they are each going to be liable for 1/6 of the total bill. And it isn't going to be any more complicated than that, because I think the difficulties start arising when what you do is start trying to put in exemptions for this, or adjust for the numbers of rooms here, or they're on the top floor so their water pressure's not quite so good, or once you get into that territory, then you enter a complexity. The art here is to get something that is simple and clear, and responsibilities are very clear. Now, that's certainly our starting point. Clearly we will consult on this proposal, and we'll see how it gets responded. But I suspect what we will get are desires on the part of some people who think they might be best served by this to argue for a degree more complexity. But if we're going to solve the problem, simplicity is, or keeping it as simple as humanly possible is the key.
Okay, thank you.
Jim?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to ask you about an issue that you have raised in your written evidence to the committee, which relates to those non-domestic customers who are connected to shared supplies but are not contributing to the operation and maintenance of the public water and sewerage network. I'm keen to understand the scale of the problem. So can you enlighten us, please, as to how big the problem is? Have you got any figures that would allow us to quantify the number of non-domestic customers that are currently benefiting from the network but not contributing to it? Do we know what the loss of income is and what that means for suppliers?
At one level, very small, to the extent that we know this. The entire bad debt charge of business stream, i.e. non-payers, so where we know that someone's liable and they're not paying, I think the bad debt charge is about 0.7%, the last time I looked. It's come down considerably since business stream was set up.
Can you put some figures on it? To
0.7%.
Yeah, but can you, what does that mean in terms of income?
Oh, sorry, 0.7% on about, what, 320 odd million? 300 million.
300.
So 2.1 million.
Right, so these are not insignificant sums, albeit that it's a small percentage of the overall business.
That's the entire bad debt charge. That's not from this particular issue. This particular issue.
This problem is, because we want to come on to this solution that you have suggested. So I want to understand what the problem is before we come to the solution.
This particular issue would be a small part of that £2.5 million worth of debt.
Would it be possible to at a later stage to provide the committee with that information so that we can better understand what the issue is?
We can certainly provide the information that we have. That's not a problem. It's not. Yeah, part of the problem here is that you don't necessarily know. Sorry, let me try and explain this. Where if you leave a premise in for electricity or gas, you call up and you get disconnected, and then someone has to flick a switch when you move into the premise, right? So suppliers of gas and electricity and telecoms and other things can easily disconnect on a temporary basis and then reconnect you, right? In water, the only way of definitively disconnecting someone is to cut the pipe, right? Which is a kind of a radical solution. So we don't do that. Now we turn the stopcock or whatever, but someone can turn that on and not tell you they've turned it on. And so the water industry has more of a problem in terms of the sort of frictional change. You know, when there's a change of tenancy, whether it's a household or a non-household, of knowing whether someone's in, they have to actually tell you and admit to the fact that they've now moved in and they are now liable for the bill. Some businesses, of course, and some householders for that matter, are less scrupulous than others in admitting as to exactly when they moved in and when they become liable. So that's what that problem, because it's going on and you don't really know what's going on, is part of the issue, and it's just trying to get as much clarity as we can into that.
It's the clarity that we're looking for, but I'm grateful for your explanation, because clearly this is not straightforward. Otherwise, you would have more information to provide to the committee. But you're asking us to consider a solution, which is the incorporation of a new provision into the bill, when by definition we don't actually know what the extent and scale of the problem is. Is that an accurate summation of what you've said?
We know that there are frictions caused by this, which are identified by other retailers trying to compete for customers. These things come about because before there was a contestable market on the non-household side, essentially what did Scottish Water worry about? It worried that the right amount of revenue was coming in from its non-household customers to cover the costs that it was allocating to those customers. Right? It didn't worry about exactly whether property A, property B and property C were paying exactly the right amounts. When you're in a contestable world, that changes. And if someone wants to switch a customer and then finds, oh, well, that customer's not been paying because, then clearly that person's sort of exempt from the market. Now, as you start to discover that, of course, if someone's getting service and they're not paying for it, then everyone else's bill is very marginally increased as a consequence. And it's just trying to address that and make sure that that sort of friction is addressed as proactively as we can.
Okay, but just to be clear, the 2.1 million that you mentioned, it would be a very small percentage of that. Yes. Okay, so really, it's a principle that all non-domestic customers should be contributing towards the network, rather than something that's about to bankrupt.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The company. Okay. I think that's probably as far as I can take it.
Finally, environmental groups have suggested that Wicks be added as a designated body. What would your view be on this?
My personal view is that the way in which we do our job is very strictly to look at or take the objectives that we're given by government and the principles of charging that we're given by government, and to calculate the lowest reasonable overall cost of that. We don't take any remit in saying, well, this doesn't seem to be value for money. Why are we doing it? Because in many cases these are essentially political or national state obligations that we have, and they're not really for us as the bean counters of how much money Scottish Water should be given to have a view on those things. That's what the government does, and that's what the government's accountable to the Parliament for. So I don't think actually, as a matter of practice, that involving us in conversations about environmental value for money is a particularly useful step forward. I think one of the real strengths of the Scottish governance framework for the industry that was created is the fact that everyone's role is very clear. Government's got this very clear role in setting objectives and the principles of charging. We've got a very clear role in sort of counting up how much that should cost households and non-household retailers. Scottish Water's got a very clear role in delivering it, and then you've got the two quality regulators, SEPA and DPQR. So it's everyone's role is very clear. Anything that confuses that or changes responsibilities or blurs accountabilities, I don't think would be a very good idea.
Final questions? All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your evidence session today. And I'll just briefly suspend the session again to allow the witnesses to leave the room. Can move on to agenda item 2, which is subordinate legislation. The committee is now invited to consider an instrument of subordinate legislation subject to the negative procedure, namely the Housing Scotland Act 2001, Assistance to Registered Social Landlords and Other Persons Grants Amendment Regulations 2012. Oh, that's a bit of a mouthful. Can I refer members to paper 3 and the accompanying instrument? Members should note that no motions to annul have been received in relation to this instrument, but members will also, however, note the Subordinate Legislation Committee has brought 2 issues to this committee's attention in relation to this instrument. One of these relates to what they believe to be defective drafting. As set out in paper 3, this relates to the part of the regulations that is meant to provide for the procedure by which local authorities must follow in considering applications for innovation and investment fund grants. However, the Subordinate Legislation Committee was concerned that the instrument does not appear to contain any provision which regulates the procedure to be followed by local authorities in considering applications for IIF grants, and refers only to how Scottish ministers and COSLA will deal with applications for IIF grants from local authorities themselves. The Subordinate Legislation Committee therefore feels there is a doubt as to whether the instrument, quote, effectively makes any provision as to the procedure to be followed by local authorities, despite that being its apparent intention. So can I invite comments from members on this piece of sublege?
Quite good to get the government officials along next week, I think, because I would certainly have concerns based on what's been stated by the Subordinate Legislation Committee, but I think it would be only reasonable to hear what the government officials and have to say in response to those concerns.
Yeah, I agree.
You agree with that, so that we invite government officials along next week?
Agree to defer consideration.
Yeah, okay, so we'll agree to defer consideration till next week and get some government officials along to explain this piece of subordinate legislation. Okay, move to agenda item 4, appointment of the European Union reporter. On the 9th of December 2010, the Parliament agreed to introduce a Parliament-wide scheme for EU engagement and scrutiny, including the introduction of an early warning system for EU legislative proposals, which was introduced, requiring subject committees to be responsible for appointing EU reporters and for scrutinising EU proposals within their area. Now that Aileen McLeod has moved on to another committee, it's necessary for us to appoint a new EU reporter, and I refer you to paper 4. Can I invite the committee to nominate a member to act as the EU reporter for the committee?
Could I nominate Jim Eadie for that position?
I think Margaret's interested.
Should have let us know, Margaret. So, well, so are we? Do we agree on Jim, or do we want to have a vote?
Or we can take it further.
Well, why don't?
Next week.
Yeah, why don't we? Rather than go to a vote on this, why don't we just defer it till next week to see if we can to see you know. Yeah, let's defer it to next week and have a discussion about it. Okay, that ends our business for today. Our next meeting is next week, 7th of November, when we're going to be hearing from the Cabinet Secretary on the budget and the water bill. I now close the meeting.